It's my privilege to introduce our speaker this morning that I know y'all know, but I want to remind you who Pastor Kevin is. It's Father's Day, and Pastor Kevin, he just fights me every time I try to get him to speak, but on Father's Day, I have so much leverage because he's got 4 kids, and I don't have any kids. You know what I'm saying? I grew up without a dad. He grew up with a dad. So on Father's Day, Pastor Kevin always gets to speak, and he's not just a father. Y'all know he is somebody that we've all loved and known in our church. He's been here since the beginning. When our church, before it had a building, it met in the Sports Hall of Fame. Before it met in the Sports Hall of Fame, it was in a Forward Church, was letting us use their coffee shop. Before it was there, it was in my backyard. And on day 1, Pastor Kevin was there saying, we're going to do something here. We're going to build something here. He was always encouraged. So Pastor Kevin's been around for all of it. Most of you know him. If you're on a serve team, you know Pastor Kevin. If you've been coming to our church for any amount of time, you know Pastor Kevin. And he's got some dad jokes he's going to share with y'all that are top shelf, extra good, so good. So here's what I want you to do. Give him those obnoxious dad laughs when he tells those dad jokes, all right? Y'all welcome Pastor Kevin. He's going to do a good job sharing with us this morning.
Giving away all my secrets. Oh, man. So last year I told you some statistics about Mother's Day and Father's Day, and they still hold true. But I worked at FedEx, and Mother's Day was one of the busiest days of the year. Weren't allowed to take off for the week of Mother's Day, just like Christmas. But Father's Day was like a ghost town. No packages, no nothing, right? And so I'm kind of discouraged for you guys because Restore actually continued that theme this year. Because for Mother's Day, you guys had Holly speak. Holly has like 12 doctorates. She's got a nursing degree. She probably is a doctor of medical stuff. She's saved who knows how many people's lives, right? And then for Father's Day, seriously, no, not yet. I know y'all laughing at me. For Father's Day, we reached out to a guy in the area. He's got his doctorate, and he mentors fathers every Tuesday night and shows them what it's like to be a dad, but then things fell through and he couldn't come. So Pastor Miller was like, you got 4 kids? So here you go. This is what you got, right? So hang on tight, bear with me, and we'll have some fun. I did read some, Pastor gave my jokes away, so I'll share them. I was going to cut them out because nobody laughed at them last time. But I'll look forward to your obnoxious jokes. Have y'all read any blogs about dads? Anybody in here? Okay. There comes a point in life as a dad that you have to embrace being a dad. And the first time that you tell the dad joke that you swore you would never tell growing up, that's the time when you embrace it. I remember the first time that I told one of my dad's jokes, and I got a little chuckle, and I was like, this ain't that bad. I read a blog about dad shoes. You know, dads, we just wear comfortable shoes because we got to chase kids around all the time, right? And so the biggest shoes we can find, bulkiest shoes, we don't care about style. We want comfort. That's why I got the dad loafers today, right? But then I was reading, I was like, all right, we got some dad jokes. How many of you, your dad told jokes growing up and you were like, those are awful? Anybody? Okay, great. 2 of you. Fantastic. This is going to be a long one today. You guys got to get with me. So I think I want to quit my real estate job. I'd rather clean mirrors for a living. It's just something I can see myself doing. Clean mirror. Want to hear a joke about a stone? Never mind, I'll skip it. Some of you heard it the second time and you're like, oh, I get it now. I get it. That's funny. If you have 13 apples in one hand, this is funny. If you have 13 apples in one hand and 10 oranges in the other hand, what do you have? Big hands. I mean, come on, guys, for real, 13 apples? Man, that was a good one. I'm going to have to skip some. This is even worse than last time. If Pastor wouldn't have told you about him, you would have laughed. You would have. This hurts. I just want you to know. I've heard this one, but daughter, Dad, I'm cold. Dad, go stand in the corner. It's 90 degrees. Yeah, all right. I've always admired fishermen. Now those are real men. Fishermen? Real? What do you call a bad joke? This. No, I want to say I'm excited to be here. I am excited to be here, but I'm very nervous as well. Some of you are like, why don't you speak more? And I'm just going to go ahead and tell you it's not pastor, it's me, okay? I don't like speaking, but I do appreciate the opportunity. I'm excited to share what God's put on my heart today. But Mark chapter 9, and when I say put on my heart, I actually have a pastor friend in Virginia Beach that every time I'm asked to speak, I call him and I'm like, hey man, what are you preaching on Sunday? Give me something to go on. I don't like that. What'd you preach on last Sunday? So he has not sent me notes yet. I've tried to get him to do that, but that hasn't worked out. But Mark chapter 9, verse 14 is where we'll pick up. But before we get there, I want to give you a little bit of background. Jesus is coming onto the scene with Peter, James, and John. Peter, James, and John is Jesus' inner circle of disciples, his three closest disciples. They were up on the mount of what we call the Mount of Transfiguration. This is where Jesus went and met with God before his death was going to take place. And during this time, he was transfigured. And I read some commentaries on this, and I wish that I could share in detail as lavishly as the commentaries did. But basically, this is what happened. Jesus started glowing like white, like a light, just like glowing, right? And God was present in his life. And the disciples saw this. These three dudes, they saw this, and they're like, oh my goodness, this is crazy what's happening to Jesus. But then also, Elijah and Moses were sent down, and Jesus on this mountain conversed with Elijah and Moses, who had already passed off the scene, were great leaders in the Old Testament, and he's conversing with them. So you can imagine if you were there with them and someone came back that you knew from history, you had heard about them, they come back, they're standing on the mountain talking to Jesus, your leader, your mind would be blown, right? So these three disciples and Jesus are coming back from the Mount of Transfiguration, and that's where we're going to pick up now. They're walking back into town, verse 14. And when they came to the disciples, they're talking about the other 9 disciples, and when they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them and scribes arguing with them. Something has happened while Jesus has been up on top with his 3 disciples, because when they come back, the disciples are arguing with the pastors of that day, the religious leaders, like they're having a legit argument. And immediately all the crowd, when they saw Jesus, were greatly amazed and ran up to him and greeted him. Next verse. And immediately all the crowd, and he asked them, what are you arguing about with them? And someone from the crowd answered him, Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute. So Jesus looks at his disciple and he says, all right, guys, hold on. What are you arguing about? And before the disciples could answer and give their side of the story, a man from the crowd steps out and he says, I'll tell you what they're arguing about. Someone from the crowd answered him, Teacher, I brought my son to you, for he has a spirit that makes him mute, and whenever it seizes him, it throws him down. And he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. And some of you parents are like, my kid does that at Walmart every time we go, right? Just not going anywhere. Can't make me. And it doesn't, look, some of you without kids, you're like, my kid will never do that. Oh, you are going to eat those words? I eat them all the time. So I asked your disciples to cast it out, and they were not able. All right, so here's what's going on. Jesus and his 3 close disciples up on the mountain Transfiguration, something incredible just happened. I mean, they were on the high of highs. These 3 disciples are ready to come back and brag to their other 9 buddies. You ain't going to believe what I just saw. It was incredible. God worked in an incredible way. And we've had these moments in our lives when things are just going really good, and we're excited to get to church and be like, yeah, God. And we like telling our friends, you're not going to believe what God just did in my life. But they come down the mountain and they're like, guess y'all ruined everything. These other 9 disciples have ticked off the entire crowd. They're arguing with the religious leaders. What's going on? And they can't even answer. A man comes forward and he's like, so here's the problem. I came with my son who is possessed of a demon. Now, first off, that's a big deal. not something I want to have to deal with. I haven't had to, thank you. I've heard stories of it, but not something I would want to have to deal with. But now the Father's stepping forward and he says to Jesus, he says, check this out. I brought my son. I asked your disciples, your followers, your closest individuals to help me by casting out this demon. And they said, they tried and they were unable to do it. Can I just say to you, talk about being thrown under the bus. Any of you ever been thrown under the bus in a way where you're like, man, you just made me look really dumb? So I have some individuals in my life. It doesn't matter what I do. If it's something dumb, they're there, right? Like I could be driving in the car by myself down the road, and I do a dumb maneuver, and I look over, and one of these individuals is sitting in the seat next to me. They just appear, right? Anybody have those people in your life? Like you do something dumb, and that one person is always there. Okay, I am by myself today. Thank you. This is fantastic. You guys are all over with me. But I texted these individuals yesterday, and I was like, all right, guys, give me your best story. That was a bad idea, okay? But give me your best story of the dumbest thing I've done while you were around. And my phone started blowing up. Boom, boom, boom. Like, all right, guys, I asked for the best, okay, the best of the worst, and you guys don't have to, like, bring up everything. But several things came up, even the me forgetting the offering. That one came up as well. That one will just live on forever. For those of you who weren't here, there was one Sunday I forgot to take offering, and so evidently that's a big deal. We have to have money to run the church or something. I don't know, but one of the stories that was shared with me was a buddy of mine who I hang out with quite a bit, work alongside of him. But my AC at my house that we sold, it stopped working, right? And so I'm a pretty handy guy. I can usually figure things out. And I didn't have a ladder at my house at this time, and I needed to get up in the attic to look at the furnace, the blower unit, make sure that everything was on up there and check the wiring. And so I had to get a chair, and like you step on the chair, and then you step on the back of the chair, and then you pull yourself through the attic opening, right? And so I'm pulling myself through this attic opening, climbing up in there, and I'm looking around. I'm like, man, I got to looking around. There's no power anywhere. I was like, this is crazy. The power is gone. I've checked the breaker. Everything's good. So I was like, all right, I got to call my buddy. So I call my buddy. I'm like, hey, man, here's what's going on. And there is no power anywhere. I've already checked the breaker. You know, I'm going through like, dude, I've checked all this stuff. And he's like, man, that's crazy. You checked the emergency on-off switch? I'm like, yeah. And I look over my shoulder. I'm like, yeah, it's on. It's right here. And then I got to thinking. I was like, wait a second. When I was climbing off that chair, off the back, finagling my seat, there's an emergency on-off switch right there in front of me on my way up into the attic. So I did this. I was like, hold on. That's it. Somebody turned the dumb on-off switch off, and that shuts the whole unit off, right? And he was like, glad I could help. And within 5 minutes, I'm getting texts from all my other buddies like, hey, man, heard you're really good at working on stuff. It's a switch, right? But we all have those people that when we do something dumb, they're there. They're watching. It's just like they're going to bring it up and they're going to be like, yeah, you remember when, right? This is a time when the disciples are standing there and like, man, we've been a part of throwing out demons. We've been a part of seeing Jesus raise people from the dead. We've been a part of all these things. And we tried to do this, but it didn't happen. And the man was very clear. He said, hey, yo, they tried and they were unsuccessful. Any of you ever been in your life where you try to do something and you're looking around like, God, where are you? You're facing something at your job that you just can't overcome. And you want to look at God and be like, God, where are you? You're facing something with your family. You're facing something with your child. And you just look and you're like, God, why is this happening? This man is very much in that situation. Verse 19 says, and he answered them, O faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? The Bible says that Jesus turns and he talks to his disciples, but he also talks to the crowd and he says, O faithless generation. Now, I read about this to find out, was this Jesus being like, man, you bunch of losers. You guys still don't believe? Have you not seen what I've done? What's going on? And it was not like that at all. It was a loving reach out saying, why are we still struggling with belief? And I think in our lives, we still struggle with this. I still struggle with this. I have times in my life where, man, I focus on everything that's going on around me, and I forget to focus on Christ. And I forget to bring him into my life. And I forget to pray. I forget to fast. I forget because I want to do things under my own power. And Jesus says to them in a loving manner, "Oh, faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? When are you going to learn? How long am I to bear with you?" And then he says, "Bring him to me," talking about the Son. Jesus talks to the people and he says, "Look, I love you, I care about you, but at some point you got to stand on your own 2 feet. At some point you've got to make the belief yours." I talked to somebody just a few weeks ago from a youth group that I was a part of many years ago now. And they texted me randomly out of the blue and, "Hey, just could you, I need to talk. I'm really struggling." It's like, all right. And I had to respond, "Who is this?" Because I didn't even have the number anymore. And so I got on the phone and they started sharing things. They jumped right into the middle of the story and I was like, "Hey, let's back up a little. Let's get caught up." And so they told me their life is, they're struggling right now. It's hard, right? And they said, and over the past however many days, I've been fasting. I've been fasting. And I was like, "Okay, well, tell me what that looks like." And they're like, "I just haven't eaten." "Okay, well, tell me more about that." "Well, I haven't eaten." And so I had to sit there and talk to them and say, we as Christians, we like to do things in our way and in our time and in our fashion. And fasting can be giving up food. Fasting can be giving up media. Fasting can be a lot of things that we're giving up. But the problem is that a lot of times we want to fast, but we don't want to replace the thing that we're giving up with prayer and Bible study. So I had to tell them, "Hey, man, look, fasting is more than just not eating. Fasting is more than just giving up television for a few days. Fasting is praying. Fasting is getting into your Bible and studying. Fasting is taking the time that you would have spent doing these things and spending that time building a relationship with God." And this person was like, "Whoa, really?" He's like, "Because I've just been sitting around watching Netflix." But that's where we are as Christians, isn't it? Jesus will look at us and say, "You're struggling, but it's your own thing." We see our kids hurt and we say, we want to help. And then verse 20. "And they brought the boy to him, and when the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell on the ground. So when the spirit saw Jesus, he's like, 'No, don't want anything. I know this guy. Jesus is powerful.' And so the boy fell out on the ground convulsing and rolled about, foaming at the mouth." Verse 21, "And Jesus asked his father, 'How long has this been happening to him?' And he said, 'From childhood. And it has often cast him into fire and into water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us.'" Now at this point, the father had a decision to make, okay? There's a lot of times I'll call customer service about an issue with whatever it is. And I'll talk to the person and they'll say, "Sir, I'm sorry, I can't help you." And I'm like, "Okay." And my wife's like, "No, that's not good enough. Call them back and ask for their boss." Okay. Call them back and ask. But a lot of times I'll kind of like, all right, that's how it is. I'm going to walk away. This father was kind of at that predicament. He could have walked up and said, Jesus said, "Bring him to me." And he could have been like, "Jesus, your disciples already tried. I'm embarrassed enough. We're just going to leave. We'll cut our losses. We tried." He could have done that. But I love that he brings him to him. And Jesus says, "How long?" And he says, "From childhood." And he tells him, the child has cast himself into the fire. He's run into the pool. Now, if y'all don't know my 5-year-old, my 5-year-old's spirited. Extremely spirited. She does things her way, in her time. And there's a lot of conflict between dad and my 5-year-old, right? I love my 5-year-old. But when my 5-year-old was 2 or 3, my wife reminded me of this story this morning. We were at a party, and there was a pool at this party, and we had a floaty, one that like straps, like basically you wrap it around the head, around the ears, strap it to the toes, so it ain't coming off, right? And my daughter's like, "We want this off," and we're like, "No, no, no." Oh, and she's in here. Oh my goodness. I'm like, "No, you can't take that off." Well, she made her way into the shed, and we were talking, and next thing we know, one of the teenagers that was there with us came over and said, "Can your daughter swim?" And we looked I wasn't there, my wife looked into the deep end of the pool, and under the water is my 3-year-old at the time just floating at the bottom of the pool. My wife jumped in. They took her to the emergency room. I went to the emergency room to check, and she's okay. But I was told there's a video at the house, and I can't bring myself to watch this video because they said for 28 seconds my daughter was under the water. And as a parent, you can sit there and you can just cringe. And you can look at me and you can judge me and say, "How dare you? What kind of parent are you?" Believe me, we've been through all of those scenarios, but I want to bring this back around because I'm a father, and I can relate to the dad saying, my child will throw himself into the fire, and my child will throw himself into the water. And when your child is hurting themselves, self-destruction, it hurts you. And some of you, you're in here, you're like, "I'm not a dad, I'm not a mom, I don't really understand." But you have loved ones around you who you're watching them self-destruct. They're making choices, they're making decisions that are not God-honoring. And you're like, "If you would just open your eyes." But I love that he cries out and he says, if you can help us in any way, please do so. And then the Bible says, and Jesus said to him, if you can, all things are possible for one who believes. And immediately the father of the child cried out and said, "I believe, help my unbelief." There's not a doubt in my mind that there are many people in America, there are many people all across this world who believe, but they don't have a relationship. They believe there's something more to life than just living a day to day, but they haven't found a true relationship with Christ. There are people who are in the church and probably here today, we're good with coming to church and saying, "I believe, and I'm here on Sunday, let's check that off the list," and then we go about and we live how we want. I got to take a picture of my son this morning. He was over here while the parking team out back, he was here while the parking team was having their huddle and praying, and I watched him. He stood there and he watched those men as they were discussing about the day, what was going to take place, and as they prayed, and my son just stood there and watched them. You know why? Because those men are his heroes. Whether you're a parent or whether you're looking to be a parent or whether you have no desire to be a parent, I don't know where your walk is. But God has put individuals in your life and in my life who need to know Christ. And I have parents who ask me quite a bit, like, "Pastor Kevin, my kids, I guess church just isn't exciting enough for them because when they come to church, they just really don't want to be here. And if we could just make it a little more exciting for them, it would be more fun for them so that they can come and they'll want to be here." And I want to say as kindly as I can, that's backwards. That's not how it is. Because life isn't easy. Christian life is not easy. We don't walk a Christian life and it's just roses all the time. But they'll talk to me and I'll just ask, like, "Okay, so what does the other 167 hours in the week look like for you?" What? Well, you bring them to church here for 1 hour a week. What does the other 167 hours in the week look like? They have access to Netflix, I assume. They have access to YouTube. They have access to Hulu. They have access to their friends. They have access to all these things. But how are we accessing them to Christ through the week? And I can say that from a parent perspective, but I can also say that from a coworker perspective. Because when I worked at FedEx, there was a harsh reality one day, and I could tell you the story, but I won't waste the time. There was a harsh reality one day where I came in and I said, "I am just as bitter as every employee here." And my attitude had to change. because I have a hope that these individuals did not have. And how we live our lives on a daily basis is important. Verse 25. And when Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." And after crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out. And the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, "He is dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. The Father could have said, "Your disciples already tried, they weren't able," but he didn't. The Father gave Jesus a chance. Jesus threw out the spirits. The Father also could have said, "You know what, this really isn't my problem, this is everybody else's problem." If people wouldn't stare at my son, it wouldn't happen as much. If people wouldn't critique, if people wouldn't do all of these things. And so my son, last Sunday, we went fishing. Me and a couple guys in the church, and my son wanted to run back to the car and grab one of his special lures. "Dad, I'll catch it on this special lure." And I was like, "All right, so watch before you cross the road." And I'm not kidding. Like I said, "Watch before you cross the road." And he's just like, straight out, right? There's a car coming. I'm like, "Caleb, you can't do that." Just yesterday, again, something happened. We were in my neighborhood. I live in a area where it's a dead end. Car was driving too fast. Caleb stepped right out, and my mother-in-law yelled, "Caleb, get out of the way." And he stepped back. And I looked at him, and I was like, "Caleb, how many times have I told you? How many times have I told you?" And he looked at me. Now here's the thing. I could have yelled at the driver for driving too fast. I can put one of those signs out in my yard that says, "Drive like your kids live here." I can make this problem of my son not looking both ways before he crosses the street, I can make it everybody else's problem because they don't drive right. But the fact of the matter is, I can't always be there to protect him. And if I don't teach him this simple truth, one day he's going to get hit. And so I looked at him and I said, "Caleb, why do you think I'm teaching you to look both ways?" And he said, "So I don't get hit." And I said, "Why do you think I don't want you to get hit?" And he looked at me. And I was like, "Because I love you." Don't you understand? I love you, right? Answer the question. And he just looked at me. I said, "Caleb, I don't want you to get hit because I love you." And that brings us to the next verses. And when he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" And he said to them, "This kind cannot be driven out by anything but prayer." There's another version that says prayer and fasting. See, it's real easy to pray. It really is. We can pray while we're driving down the road because we're talking to God. God can hear us. God can hear our thoughts. But it's prayer and fasting. It's whenever we're willing to give up. What have you given up recently in order to see God work in your life? But then I love this because Jesus, he could have right there, after the man said, "Your disciples tried and it didn't work," he could have looked at him and been like, "Psh, you guys are worthless. You guys couldn't cast out a simple demon? Come on, guys, I'm more powerful than that." But he didn't. He waited until they were in private. And a lot of times God disciplines us in private and we get our feelings hurt. But God, this isn't fair. And the disciples asked him, they said, "God, why couldn't we?" And he said, "Because you lack faith." And can I say to us today, it's that simple. We try to make Christianity this super difficult thing that we have to work towards. And God says, "No, it's not that. You have to believe. You have to have faith." I'm going to give a plug for our groups, our small groups. Guys, we have small groups that meet all around this city. I was talking to a pastor here recently, and they said, "Man, I used to have to go out to houses 6 nights a week and meet with families in their homes." Man, you guys would be ticked if I showed up at your house and been like, "Hey, we're having Bible study tonight. Here I am." But we have small groups that meet all around the area. We have a new men's group that's starting on Monday night at 6:30, and I'm excited about that men's group. You know why? Because I know the history. I know the life. I know the change that has happened in this individual's life who's going to be leading this group. And it's exciting to me to see all of our small group leaders all over the city because they all have a story. Just like this man was trying to protect his child. They have a story. And if you're going through something, if you're facing something today, I don't mean to be mean, but it truly is on you. You've got to decide, I'm going to turn my life to Christ. I'm going to give my life to him. Not just a prayer, God help me through this, but a life change. And if you don't know what that is, we'd love to talk to you about it. But then, I know I'm being hard at the end, but I want to close with this. I want to close with some excitement. And just to remind y'all, if you're here today, I'm going to take a drink because I told them I would hit on this. But if you're here today, we've got drinks and peanuts out back for everybody. Not just dads, everybody, okay? Make sure you get one on the way out. But here's what I want to close with. If you look 2 verses later in that passage, the disciples are arguing amongst each other again. And their argument is, who is the greatest among us? Who will get to sit on the right hand of Christ when we get to heaven? And parents, I want to say this is an encouragement to you. You might have just finished that conversation that you looked in your kids' eyes and you thought, they're getting it. They understand what I'm saying. I mean, you had a discussion and they're never going to do this thing wrong again. Their room is going to be spotless because they understand that taking care of their stuff is very important. And then 12 seconds later, they're destroying the living room, right? Jesus had the same thing happen with his disciples. He had this teaching moment where he said you couldn't cast them out because you didn't have faith. And then 2 verses later, they're like, yeah, but who's the best? Am I better than Peter? Because he runs his mouth a lot. I'm more quiet. Can I say to us here, look, it's Father's Day, and I get that. I know that. But in some way, shape, or form, we are all called to be fathers, mothers, spiritual role models. The reason that I want my kids in church is because I want them to see individuals like yourself serving God. And when they see you through the week at Walmart, at Kroger, at the park, I want them to be able to come up to you and know that they're going to learn something from you. And when we're interacting with our coworkers, the ones that drive us crazy, the ones who say the same thing all the time, complain about the same thing, Can I say to us, the Father was tired of dealing with his Son and having to watch him all of the time to make sure that he was safe. But he didn't give up. He brought him to Jesus. So would you pray with me?